Welcome back. We are going to review April 22nd to May 12th of the Daily Chronological Reading Bible. The link is in the notes if you don't have that one yet. But I also love to get my tried, tested, and true study Bible that I have had for a very long time. Trying to make your picture a little bit bigger so I can see myself in here while I talk to you. So we actually finished up Psalm, the book of Psalm, which I've already told you it's a fantastic book, really great if you're going through different emotional things. A lot of them are songs and hymnals, but the last couple days of this section, really May 11th and 12th, we start getting back into story, and that takes place in First King. And so we see David transition his leadership over to Solomon. And I don't know if you remember, but before we were in Psalm, there was this time period where David was setting up his entire kingdom and preparing it for Solomon. Every good leader makes not just followers, but a really good leader makes other leaders. And you ultimately are creating people to replace you, right? And that's exactly what David did. Such a beautiful example of leadership. But what happens in 1 Kings 1 is not exactly what we would have thought, right? One thing I want to note about this is that David, for all the strengths that he had, and we see this in the Bible, everyone has weaknesses as well. He did not do a great job with his children, and he really let them run amok. Excuse me. I am going to read just a little bit of kind of his pattern with his kids, right? So we see, I might say the name's wrong, Adonijah is trying to take over the throne. He's the fourth son, which would make sense because he's the first in line at this point. But he didn't go to his father. His father is on his deathbed, and he takes part of the leadership. He knows which ones will not agree with him, so of course he doesn't go to them, and he declares himself king. So Adonijah was David's fourth son and would be the logical choice for next king if you're doing it by lineage. David's first son, Amnon, remember, was killed by Absalom for having raped his sister. Remember that story we went through? It's in 2 Samuel 13. So super dysfunctional, bitterness, rage, lust, all these horrible things combined. Unfortunately, they had learned that from their father, right? David was not faithful with Bathsheba. Also a wild, crazy story, which also takes place in 2 Samuel in chapter 12. His second son, Daniel, is mentioned only in the genealogy of 1 Chronicles 3, and he is likely dead at this current point. And then David's third son, Absalom, died. He was also rebellious. You can find that in 2 Samuel 18. A lot of people expected that it would be Adonijah to be the next king, but David had his own plans, right? And some of this is a little bit of a redemptive story because Solomon is actually the second child or the second son that Bathsheba and David have. And if you remember, Bathsheba was married to one of David's best friends. He lusted after her. He saw her. They had sex. He actually had her husband killed on the battlefield. And then the prophet told them, God said, do not do this. And their baby, when they had the baby, because she got pregnant, it died. But later on, she does become queen. He did love her. They both did wrong. They did wrong things. And later on, they got another son, Solomon. And I think Solomon, I didn't put it in my notes, but I feel like he's the seventh son. And so through that line, God actually carries on the Davidic line. So out of control kid, trying to take over, right? So then Bathsheba actually goes to David. One of the prophets goes to David. He says, no, it's Solomon. Make Solomon king. So then we get to chapter 2. And I love what David says to him in verse 3. Walk in his ways, keep his decrees and commands, his laws and requirements, as written in the law of Moses, so you may prosper in all you do and wherever you go, and that the Lord may keep his promise to me. If your descendants watch how they live, and if they walk faithfully before me with all their heart and soul, you will never fail to have a man on the throne of Israel. So David, is transitioning really well. But what we see quickly in verse 15, okay, so the son that tries to take over, number 4, Adonijah goes to Bathsheba. Okay, so this is now the king's mother. Listen to verse 15. As you know, he said, the kingdom was mine. All Israel looked to me as their king. But things changed, and the kingdom has gone to my brother, for it has come to him from the Lord. Now I have one request of you. Do not refuse it. How arrogant. It was my kingdom. Have you ever felt entitled to inheritance or to someone else's status because you're related to them or you're besties with them or whatever? You're not entitled to all of it. I don't mean it mean. If you get left inheritance, that's fantastic. It is not yours. It is the person's. The level of arrogance here, even after he is told he does not have the throne. And what he's actually asking for here is the virgin that was taking care of David when David was on his deathbed. And she would be considered a part of his harem. Even though he never had sex with her, he was ill and older. It's basically trying to take over in another way. I mean, he's sleazy. It's gross, right? And what we see is Solomon gets word of this and is like, nope, and kills him. And then also cleans up what his dad told him to watch out for. The leaders, the military leader that wasn't good, the prophet, he tells him what to take care of. We don't know why David didn't take care of it himself, but Solomon swiftly makes a decision. So one of the things I want to point out is when someone shows you who they are, believe them. And I don't mean first impression. I think a lot of us will make first impressions. They're usually wrong, your first impression. But when they show you their character and who they are, believe them. He knew his brother was going to come for him and keep coming for him, and he took swift action. His dad told him who the traitors were within his own group, which you saw a lot of them were helping Adonijah try to take the throne. That's a problem. When you have a team, it's okay to have different personalities. Absolutely, actually a good thing. But when you have someone that's a dissenter, that's against you, that's really dangerous. Get rid of them. Probably not kill them like Solomon does here, but get rid of them. Remove them from your life, right? Okay. In chapter 3, we see that Solomon takes Pharaoh's daughter as his wife. Now, God is really clear. I think it's in Deuteronomy. He says not to intermarry. Don't marry between faiths. He says that today. I know people that have children that come from very different faiths and still have different faiths, and their poor kids don't have any faith at all because they're so confused. Don't do that. The most important decision you make is following the Lord. The second most important decision is who you decide to marry. There are a lot of natural consequences, good and bad, from who you decide to marry. Okay. So one of the things that I thought was interesting about Pharaoh's daughter marrying marrying Solomon. If you see in chapter 9, verse 16, Pharaoh actually gives a town, I think it's called Gezer, Gezer, as a wedding gift to her. So that was an Israeli city, but somehow it had been taken over. And the two main powers at that time were Israel and Egypt. And so he gives it to his daughter, which actually puts that Israeli city back into Israel control. So God can still use messy things for his glory. So how cool is that, right? One of the problems that happened when he married her was that pagan practices started coming back. And that's really why God warns against it, to not have opposite faiths when you marry. And then I did a little story about this on my social media this morning. So God wakes up Solomon in the middle of the night, and you see it in verse 5 of chapter 3. Sorry, verse 4. And God says, ask for whatever you want for me to give to you. It's the only place I am aware of in scripture that God asks someone directly what they want. And the first thing Solomon does is he glorifies God. He thanks him for who you are, who he is, what he has done for his dad, what he's done for him. And then he basically says, I'm young and I still don't know what I'm doing. In verse 9, he says, give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. God is so impressed with this choice of request. He didn't ask for vengeance. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for power. And so God says, I'm going to give you that. And there's multiple scripture that says Solomon was the wisest man to ever live. But he said, also, because that's what you've asked for, I am going to give you wealth, and I'm going to give you health, and I'm going to give you prosperity. And he does. And if you've ever looked it up, Solomon is the wealthiest person to have ever lived. His wealth is crazy. If you look up the tables on, they've adjusted it for inflation and all different things, what we could compare it to, no one is even close. It's just out of the ballpark. And God is very happy with him. How beautiful to be able to have that conversation. And another thing to point out, it's in the middle of the night while he was having a dream that God comes to him. God often loves to come to us in the evening because we are quiet and we are still, and that is when we are available. So I know it's a little bit shorter than our usual, but we're really going to be digging right back into it. So as soon as we start on May 13th, my talks are going to get longer again, and I'll go back to every week. I know I've been doing every other week since it's been Psalms, but we start talking about the building of the temple, and then we'll start getting into Proverbs, which are so fun. They're the best one-liners. You want little bits of wisdom? That's the place to go.